Your Soul Scripts presents Conversations with Your Higher Self. Today, we have another edition in our multi-part series on psychic protection and negative entities. And today we're talking with Laura Van Tyne. Laura is a remote viewer, speaker, and author. Laura offers solutions for etheric protection, focusing on specific tools and modalities for spiritual protection and raising your frequency to optimize your spiritual health. Hello, Laura. So glad you could join us today.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
You bet. And thank you for letting me preview this book. It is so awesome. I don't know if y'all can see it okay.
Thank you.
I have it tabbed like crazy because there's lots of stuff in here that I would just love to go over that is specific to this subject. I mean, this whole book is specific to this subject today.
It is a small book, but it is content dense, but it's easy to read at the same time.
Very, very much a good read. So before we begin, let's just start with the basics. And I know you outlined this very well in your book, but maybe you can just give us an abbreviated version of your definition of entity, maybe versus a psychic attack, maybe versus negative attachments, if there is any delineation between all of those.
There's a lot of delineation. So a lot of what we've been programmed to believe is, we talk about spirit, right? Well, my issue with the word spirit is it can mean so many things. So if you and I are to go to the zoo, and I say, hey, Allison, look at that mammal. Well, what are you going to look at? Are you going to look at the lions? Are you going to look at the meerkats? Are you going to look at the elephants? Possibly a sea lion? What are we looking at? So it's really important to define this unseen world. We categorize everything in our 3D physical mortal world of time, space, and gravity. But for some reason, when we talk about those other realms, we tend to just lump everything in a spirit. And that's a dangerous place to be, because when we can identify what it is, what it does, how it's there, how it got there, it literally takes the power away from it. So in the 3D world of time, space, and gravity, which we're here talking to each other, that is one dimension. And then we have the fourth dimension, or the lower astral, hell, limbo, whatever you want to call it. That is the land of ghosts and these dark entities. And there's tons of different types of dark entities. And these dark entities really do attach to us. And one of the things that I explain in this book is that when the Luciferic forces, Lucifer, the dark entities, whatever you want to call it, fell from the light of God, left creator, left source, nobody ever says, gee, where did they go? Right?
Yeah.
They had to go somewhere. Well, they went from the heavens, the higher realms, down to the fourth dimension, that land of ghosts. And when they did that, they realized they needed an energy source. They needed a fuel source. They no longer had access to the light of God or the heavens. So what did they do? They thought, we're going to thwart God's ascension plan here. And we are going to start utilizing these humans as an energy source. So they're using the fourth dimension as a step down transfer for them. When we die from the third dimension, when we incarnate here for the experiences we need, and we die, we go from the third dimension to the fourth dimension as a step up transformer to cross over into the higher realms. Well, these beings and entities have been literally reigning over this territory for millennia. And in fact, just yesterday, I was working with a client, and he had a bunch of dark entities and attachments on him. And I'm explaining the same concept to him. And when I'm removing them, I contain them. They do not escape. And I want to talk about that in just a moment. But as I'm removing them, one of them literally says to my client, yeah, she's right. She figured it out about the concept of it. And that was the first time I've heard that from an entity. And by the way, when I work with a client, we work together as a team. So they see and experience what I'm seeing and experiences, so they know it's real. and they see that these attachments are permanently gone. And before we segue into this, I want to say, I can't emphasize this enough. If anybody out there ever hires a psychic or a medium or a shaman or whatever to remove attachments, remove dark entities, and they bind them, bury them, or cast them away, those are the wrong answers. Run from that person. Because if you're binding a ghost or a dark entity, burying them or casting them away, eventually they break free and they will come back to you, or they become somebody else's problem that is exceptionally spiritually irresponsible to bind, cast, or bury these entities. And if we think of them as bacteria, would we want somebody to shoot a load of bacteria under our skin? Well, that's what it does to our Mother Earth.
Yeah.
So there's my sermon for the moment.
Yeah, no, that's very good information. You know, it's not something that I think a lot of people would even consider. Now, you touched upon something that makes me go, the whole, we're in the third dimension, then the fourth dimension above us is these lower entities, and then we go beyond that to get to the fifth. How does the math on that doesn't make sense in my head? Is there a way to explain why that is, why they're above us?
Well, then I wouldn't, above us is a human construct of a term.
Okay.
The fourth dimension impacts us all the time. It's like there's an overlay between the third and the fourth, because these entities have created that. So if we look at 500 BC India, 1600 Ireland, 1948 United States, every culture throughout time has words for ghosts, demons, and angels. If they don't exist and if they don't impact us, why is that? So to say it's above, we're supposed to go from 3, 4, 5, but these guys have hijacked that fourth dimension. It's now a very low frequency dimension. Every ghost needs to go home. A ghost is a former human. A ghost is a person who died. They left their physical body. These are like rental units, right? We don't take them with us. And when we die, our karmic time here on this planet is done. There is no such thing as unfinished business. If your loved one died and they're eating dinner with you every night as a ghost, that's not unfinished business. That's called an attachment. And what happens is their grief becomes our grief becomes their grief, but we don't necessarily see it, and it becomes magnified. 10 times out of 10, when I help somebody cross over a loved one, especially somebody who committed suicide, they immediately start to feel better and start to feel a release. And when I work with somebody in this manner, they get to watch their loved ones cross over and go home. It is the biggest spiritual gift we could ever give them, because only when we cross the soul over are they afforded soul healing, soul restoration, counselors of divine wisdom to help them understand the life or lifetimes they've lived. That will never, ever happen as a ghost. Ghosts are chronically tired, they're cold, they're hungry. And these dark entities feed off of that. I call it soul food, SOUL food, for a reason. And here's the scary part. These dark entities can and do reincarnate ghostly souls. So when a ghost comes back and reincarnates from the fourth dimension, they come back broken. They come back with soul pieces missing. They come back with personality disorders possibly, or all kinds of things, because they were never afforded the care and nurturing of the higher realms of the heavens. No matter how awful a person was, think of like the world's worst pedophile, they still need to cross over. We still need to make sure they cross over, because when they cross over, they are now in the hands of the higher realms and they no longer impact this dimension.
And there's something else in your book that you brought up that I found was very interesting. You should always make sure that all souls cross over. So are you saying that every time a loved one passes from this earthly body, we should be assisting in some way?
It can't hurt. So in the book is a cross. If you have a loved one that dies, make sure they cross over. We automatically assume that our loved ones cross over, and that's what the dark ones want us to believe. They automatically assume we cross over. So if you have a loved one who's died by suicide, natural causes, cancer, child, grandma, whatever, in the back of that book is a crossing over prayer that you can use to take your power back, to help your loved one cross over. There's a huge spiritual service. And in that prayer, make it personal. Say your loved one's name. The best prayers are the ones that come from the heart. We all have the power to do this, but when we're in those depths of grief and despair, that prayer is really, really helpful.
Now,
and I'm also...
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
There's a delay. What might be a sign that a loved one hasn't crossed over?
If it's in the daytime and maybe you smell them, like you have that sense of smell, or if you have a pet and they're staring off somewhere into space. Pets are really psychic, cats and dogs. If you see them out of the corner of your eye, or you're seeing something, or you feel like your thoughts aren't your own, or you just have this unexplained grief or unexplained anxiety, chances are there's something or someone with you. I'm starting to teach an online class called Spiritual Self-Defense. And I talk about in detail all the different types of unseen energies, what they look like, how we can examine them. I mean, we've got the dead who haunt the living. We have living who haunt the dead. And this is especially true when a parent loses a child, because it's not the natural order of things.
Right.
And it's not that the parent is being cruel or vicious. It's just that the grief is so tremendous, it creates an attachment. The dead can haunt the dead. And this is very true in battlegrounds, because throughout the history of the planet, this predecessor energy, the energy of war, they don't know they're dead. So they're in this do loop almost over and over and over. I have one guy who's printed off the crossing over prayer, and he puts them in mason jars, and he visits battlegrounds and he buries it.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. So, and there's all kinds of different hauntings in that sense. And we'll go over that in depth with these classes, the spiritual self-defense classes.
That's interesting, because my first house when I moved to the state was a murder house. And I was not aware of that until I started doing some research. Now, because the family came back and lived there after the father was murdered, they had the place cleared. I had the place cleared by a priest as well, even though I didn't feel anything. But there seemed to be this loop of the guy, his name was Richard, that would show up like on holidays. He would show up next to me while I'm cleaning the turkey in the sink. My now husband would see him walk through the back porch. And it was just nothing threatening, nothing bad, but it felt like there was a loop. So I brought in a priest again to send him to the light, because I didn't know if he was trapped there or not. What do you do in circumstances like that? Not that a lot of people buy murder houses.
Well, a lot of real estate agents call me for a lot of reasons. If they have a house that doesn't sell, there's a reason. And it could be a murder, it could be a suicide, it could be just a ley line, negative energies. We're bringing in a few right now. And so one of the things that we can do, I'm just going to do this right now, is you can call in your angels to cross them over. I talk about this in the class. I talk about this in the book. Use your angels. Angels are here to serve humanity. They are the most underutilized service beings that we use. We are taught to believe, I'm getting a lot of pressure of some dead. We're going to cross these over in just a few minutes. We've been programmed to believe that my problems aren't big enough to warrant an angel's help. My problem, I'm not worthy of an angel's help. There's all kinds of things that we've been programmed to believe, but those are false. Who told us that I'm not important enough to have angelic help. Who told us my problem wasn't big enough to have angelic help? It wasn't God. It wasn't the creator, right? Wasn't
Catholic
source.
Church.
Catholic Church,
In
dark
my
entity.
case. Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
and here's the thing about the Catholic Church. I'm just going to call a spade a spade.
Yeah.
When you walk into a Catholic church, what's the first thing you see? We see the tortured Christ, the perpetual torture of an ascended master, hanging, head bowed down, being tortured. That's black magic. That immediately fills the parishioners full of guilt, blame, and shame.
Oh, that's so true.
That is not productive. It is not healthy. It is black magic. It's black magic 101. And these tortured crosses are all over the planet. If anybody has one, I would advise them to break it and dispose of it. When we see Christ, we see him with his arm, in the earlier pictures, his arms open, his hands open up, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's sending energy through his hands. We are energy beings. We've been taught to pray like this. This makes us a closed circuit. So we're not as adept to connect to the higher realms as if we were praying like this. Who taught us to pray like this?
Yep.
And newsflash, Christ did not come here to die for our sins for billions of people throughout eternity. That makes no sense. He came here to mitigate the karma caused by the Lucifer rebellion. He came here to tell us all, we can all heal. We all have the power within ourselves. That makes much more sense. And it reduces the low frequency vibration of guilt, blame, and shame. Those are some of the best ghost creators out there. Well, I was born in sin, so I'm going to die in sin. God doesn't love me. I'm just not going to cross over because God doesn't love me.
Yeah.
Can't tell you how many cute little old ladies I've crossed over who believe that.
And it's so low vibration. And that's the fuel that feeds them, right?
Absolutely. And if we can remove the word sin from our vocabulary and change it with experience, I have had an experience. I have learned this from the experience. I will move on now. It gives us our power back. But if we say, oh, I'm a sinner, I did this horrible thing, I sinned, it keeps us in a perpetual low vibration of guilt, blame, and shame. But if we turn it into an experience, what did I learn from it? What can I take away with it? How can I take it and grow? That's what we need, because this is all about soul sovereignty right now. We hear that buzzword all the time. How do we become sovereign beings again? This is the first step.
The programming goes so deep, doesn't it?
It does. And next year, my talks are going to be on what we've been programmed to believe. And I'm dissecting all of these things, because once we understand how this works, it's so freeing and so liberating. I've had so many clients that have come here, and they have a spiritual team. And the book is called Soul Tribe: Navigating the Spiritual War. It's about how do you build your spiritual team with intention and discernment. So we have, not all spiritual teams are created equal. In those other realms, there's shapeshifters, right? There's thought forms, there's all kinds of things. So if you are connecting to your spiritual team, make sure you're not connecting to a shapeshifter. We've been programmed to believe, well, this is my guide, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do we know it really is your guide? How do we know it's not an imposter? And it's no different than the priest who is a serial pedophile that moves from church to church. So what you can do is you can visualize yourself pouring salt over these beings. If they stay, that's one of your true team members from the higher realms. If they disappear or shapeshift, you've dodged a bullet.
Wow. That's amazing. So let's talk for a minute about because I was intrigued by that's one of the things I marked. How do you build a spiritual team? What does that look like? Can I go, well, I'll take Archangel Michael here, and I'll take Christ here, and I'll take this person here? Or do you have to earn that, or how does that work?
Our spiritual teams are karmically earned. And it means that it's a building and growing process. Our spiritual teams change throughout our life and throughout our lifetimes. One of the easiest ways to start growing our spiritual team, especially if you are having issues with maybe an addiction of some sort, or you're going through some type of traumatic grief, PTSD, one of the things you can do is call upon your angels. And it's very simple. It's very eloquent. I am requesting a team of angels to be with me right now. Use right now, use immediately, because there's no time in those dimensions, and be direct and be specific. My teenage daughter is about to go in her car and drive on the freeway. I am requesting a team of 50 angels to be with her and her car from the moment she leaves the driveway until the moment she returns home tonight. And your job is to protect her and guide her with spiritual wisdom and insights. This stuff works it works wonderful.
So simple, but we just don't think about it.
We don't, but we've been programmed not to think about it, because
Right.
angels are supposed to be for special occasions, right? It's like, Christmas. And use them all the time. If your child is having night terrors, and I address this in the spiritual self-defense class, if your child is having night terrors, can't sleep, bring in angels. Bring in as many angels as you want. Bring in 1,000, bring in 5, whatever feels right to you. Trust your intuition. Our intuition is our most profound and important psychic ability. It's not seeing dead people. When we trust our intuition, we learn to connect to God, to source. We learn to step back and have a pause before we overreact. We become more thoughtful in our responses. And that changes our karma, and it changes our soul path. So use your angels. Use them for a good parking spot.
Can someone put an entity on you or put a curse on you and send bad things your way, even if you're vibing high? Is that possible?
Yes. And in that class that I teach, I talk about different types of hauntings. The living haunting the living is very, very common, and it's the most difficult to deal with, but there's ways to deal with it. Dealing with the dead is so much easier than dealing with living people.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, right? I know. I have helped people on many occasions break away from voodoo, from Santeria, these types of black magic. One of the things that you want to look for if you feel like somebody is negatively influencing you, did they give you something? Did they give you a business card? Did they give you a little gift? Because what that does is it creates an Aquacord or an attachment to you. So there's a couple of ways you can do this. And I have a video of this on my Instagram account, The Karmic Path, kind of buried down in there a bit, but I show people how you can utilize salt and foil to return the energy. The issue is to do no harm. But if somebody is sending you bad or negative energy, you have the right to protect yourself. By the way, it's a karmic test. If you are an empath, let's say, and you're letting people take advantage of you, you're actually earning negative karma yourself, because you're allowing yourself to be abused. Ooh. You'd never let someone else abuse them, right? But you're allowing yourself. So when we can understand that and return the energy, not through hatred or anything, I'm returning the gift, right? That's all it is. You take a piece of aluminum foil. Mirrors are portals, right? Write their name on a piece of paper, wrap it up, shiny side in with salt. And what it does, salt cleanses in all dimensions. It's cleansing the energy and it's returning the energy. It's a very, very powerful tool. It's if this person is sending you love and light and blessings, they're getting love and light and blessings back. If they're sending you other stuff, they're getting other stuff back. And I need to figure out what number that is, but it's about halfway down my Instagram feed, but there's a video on how to do it, what it looks like. It's such a powerful tool.
That brings up an interesting thought. Do you have to know who the person is that you feel might be sending you the negativity? Because with social media, you could end up having haters you don't even realize.
Oh yeah.
So what would you do in that case? Just go, angels, take this.
Well, yeah, right. So one of the things that we can do is we can disconnect our Aquacords, and an Aquacord it derives from our solar plexus mainly, right here. Disconnect them. You can it's a visualization technique and it's very powerful. So when you disconnect the Aquacords, and my rule is you never litter the ether. So we disconnect. I can take like maybe a selenite, visualize a selenite knife, and I'm just disconnecting those Aquacords. I'm going to hand them off to an angel, because now these Aquacords connect us to every person, place, or thing, right? So, and they're like communication cables going back and forth. So when I disconnect them, and I disconnect all of them, I'm not going to sift through and say, oh, my husband, oh, my friends, they're good. Just do them all, because the good ones always come back. Hand them off to an archangel, because now everybody who is on the other receiving end of your Aquacords are now connecting to the angelic realms. Those who are of lower frequency, it does not feel good. There's a delta in the energetic signature.
Wow.
And they may let go, or they may hang on, and it may shift some things for them also. So don't just disconnect your Aquacords and toss them on the ground. It's like, driving out of the car and you're eating fast food and you just throw it out your window. It's the same thing. Yeah. Don't do it. Don't eat fast food either. Yeah.
That's interesting. Now, what about, let me just look in here. You talked, this was an interesting one. You talked in your book about astral travel and a woman haunting you. So I guess this brings us back to the Aquacords, because that's how you got her to stop.
This woman was relentless. I would disconnect the Aquacords, but she was quite the powerful black magician.
Ooh.
She was pretty serious, and I didn't know, this is early on in all of this. I didn't know, and I didn't understand where these psychic attacks were coming from the longest time. And I started putting pieces of the puzzle together. She was the relation of a friend of mine. That's all it was. And I'd never met her in person. Then I eventually met her once in person. But I started connecting some dots, and I realized who this was. And it took me years to figure this out, how to remove a living person. I'm much more efficient at it now. But karma, not wasting any energy, she was my biggest teacher for how to deal with the living haunting the living. And in an odd roundabout way, I'm really grateful to her, because I've been able to help thousands of people who have been cursed, who have a living person haunting them. Living people can do all kinds of things to others. They can put like these etheric devices in bodies, and I don't want to scare people too much, but they can do all kinds of stuff. Because of her, and I'm not kidding you, almost 8 years of her torturing and abusing me and my family, I learned how to stop this. And it was almost as if my spiritual team said, I needed this experience so I can go forth and have these conversations and to help other people. I wish this person no ill will. In fact, I'm extremely grateful to her to this day, which is rather ironic on so many levels, but I'm really grateful to her.
Isn't that the case with most people that, yeah, those biggest lessons are just so profound and eye-opening that you become grateful for them as you're going through it. Not so much, but
not so much. At some point I'm like, what the heck, right? I mean, she would present herself to my daughters.
Oh.
And my daughters are rather psychic too. And I literally asked my daughters, because she came in and she would choke me in my sleep until I couldn't breathe. I would wake up with bite marks on me and bruises on me. It was really, really, it was stuff that Hollywood horror movies are made out of. And then she started haunting my two of my daughters. And I asked them, what did this look like? Because Mom, this person's going to come in, says she's going to kill you, says you're evil, you're this, you're that. And, this is like 2 a.m. or whatever. Right. And so I asked daughter number 1, I said, well, what did this thing look like? Oh, it's this woman and her hair is this way. I'm like, whoa. And then the next night she haunts the other daughter. And I asked the other daughter, well, what does she look like? They described the same person. And that's how I knew what was really happening.
Wow.
And so it was intense.
So glad that's over for you.
Me too. And I get to help other people who have the similar issues.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of it going on out there now. Is there an increase in things happening? Because I feel like sometimes even in the spiritual community, there's some jealousies going on and people are playing out things that aren't so benevolent.
Yes, it's very easy to do. If anyone out there who hires a spiritual practitioner, psychic medium, ask them some questions. Ask them, how do you clear yourself between clients? Doctors do it. Why don't spiritual practitioners do it, right? Ask them, how do they discern who or what it is they're communicating with? If they just say, oh, I trust spirit, run. Blind trust is not your friend in this realm. If they say, well, I just know. If they say, I have tools of discernment, and what I talk about this in the book and in the class a lot, all of these different tools of discernment we can use, because we need tools to figure this out. The only power the unseen world has is they're unseen. That's it. But if they're unseen, how do you know they're there, right? I didn't know that woman haunting me was a woman haunting me for almost 8 years.
Wow.
Once I figured it out, there was no more power. But then how do you take it to the next step to stop it completely? And in the book, I talk about what does work and what doesn't work. And some of my biggest lessons were what doesn't work and why. And I would get so frustrated. I mean, I have a sage story that I talk about in some of my presentations that I am so desperate. I haven't slept in 18 months. Along with the living person haunting me, there were these shadow men and all these ghosts and all these other beings that invaded our house. And they were really honing in on my then 6-year-old daughter. It was scary. It was like, I learned that fear in small doses is designed to keep us safe, but fear in large doses can be paralyzing. And so it was the haunting of our house made a Hollywood horror movie just pale in comparison. And that's not an exaggeration. We woke up one morning, and I've told this story a couple of times. Oh, actually, it was in the middle of the night. My daughter comes racing down the hall, and she tells me the shadow men are talking in my room, Mommy, and they said that they're going to steal my soul so they can break you. That's not what a 6-year-old says.
No, that's
at
horrifying.
2 in the morning or whatever time that was. It was terrifying. And all I could think of was, oh my God, I don't know what to do. And I'm searching and searching and searching. We're, calling every form of a psychic, every religious practitioner, spiritual practitioner. I mean, I'm leaving no stone unturned. I'm moving heaven and earth to figure this out. And one of the first things I came across was somebody says, well, burn some sage. I'm like, okay, all right, where do you buy sage? Okay, that's how new I was. Where do you buy sage? So I go buy some sage, and I'm like, okay, this is great. Now I have not slept in about a year. If I got 2 consecutive hours of sleep a night, that was a full night's sleep. And so I send the girls off to school. My husband's off to work. We've got like this little menagerie of pets. We've got a house rabbit, a dog, a couple cats, some chickens, whatever. And everybody roams in and out, but the chickens, they stay outside. And I burn the sage, and I do exactly what I'm supposed to do, and nothing happened. So I tell my friend, I'm like, nothing happened. And she's like, well, did you burn white sage? I'm like, didn't know there was a difference. She's like, I've got some white sage. I'm like, okay, great. She comes by and I love her to death, but my problem was bigger than that. And I've since realized so many things about sage. So she comes by and she goes, okay, here's 12 bundles of white sage. And they were very nicely bundled. She goes, just burn one at a time. They're really powerful. And I'm like, okay, great. So I take the girls to school. I'm so tired. And my husband's off to work. And I'm like, okay, if one's good, 12 is going to be really good because I got a really big problem. Okay, now sleep deprived again. So I put them all in a silver mixing bowl and I light them on fire. And all of a sudden the silver mixing bowl turns really hot. I drop it. There's plumes of smoke and soot hitting the ceiling. Every smoke detector starts going off. Oh. And literally, I go outside with this thing. I grab some hot pads to grab the bowl and I go outside. The animals run outside. The smoke detectors are going on. The house is just billowing with smoke in every room at this point because I had like every door open and stuff like that. And I go outside and I can see these beings through the haze of the smoke literally laughing at me.
Oh,
it was one of the lowest points ever. So here's what I've learned about sage. Sage is a black magician's tool, a tool that the dark side uses to give us a thought that, oh, this is powerful, this is going to work, but it doesn't. It's great for sausages, it's great for ceremonies, it's great in food, right? It's a huge antiseptic. So it's really good if you have digestion issues, etc. But it's not going to remove these dark entities. It's not going to clear your home. If you look at what the Christ child was gifted from the three magi, comes from the word magicians, he was given gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Okay, we're thinking gold, oh, that's worth money, right? That's something. Okay, so why was the Christ child gifted tree sap? Nobody ever asked that question, right? Why was he gifted tree sap? Well, because frankincense and myrrh are high frequency trees, and you're using the resin or the pure essence of the flowers. And it's much more powerful than a dried, crispy leaf of a shrub. So the resin of a tree is the lifeblood of the tree, right?
Yep. And
the oil comes from usually pressed flowers and pressed leaves, which is the new life of that plant. So when we utilize those resources, it has a lot more power to it. And I include this in the psychic self-defense class. You get a kit to go with it because I want people to have the tools that I know work. I spent tens of thousands of dollars trying to figure this out. And it all comes down to this little box of about a dozen items, and it is so helpful. And you burn these resins, you can burn them on a charcoal round. You can get frankincense resin almost anywhere. Dragon's blood's a little bit harder to find, but burn them on a charcoal round, open a window, and it cleans and clears things. And it's very, very powerful.
Should you be saying or doing anything while you're burning it?
Request the angels to remove all of those dark energies and entities and take them to the appropriate realm for processing right now. And you can keep saying that over and over and over.
You are such a wealth of information. How did you come to be this person that you are now?
Well, I used to be a middle school math and Spanish teacher.
That's a little different.
Right? I have a master's in education.
Well, hey, you're teaching us
a second language. So I studied. I took notes. I was so desperate for relief and reprieve. My husband and I could never go on a vacation. We couldn't even go out to dinner as a couple for about a decade. That's how bad it was. And I studied and studied and studied. There is not one form of discipline that has all the answers. If you can study the Bible, the Quran, you can study shamanism, everything in between. Every form of spiritual study has really good nuggets in there. Use your discernment, use your intuition about what works, What rings true for you? I always tell my clients, what rings true for you? Listen to yourself, because nobody else is going to do it for you. Trust your intuition. Your intuition is something that you earn. And the more you practice it, the more you're in tune with it. And practicing intuition, it sounds hard, it sounds daunting, but it can be as simple as writing down on a couple of pieces of paper and just, a truth and a false or something, and mix them up and just feel the energy of them and just kind of tune in and just take a stab at it. If you're right, great. If you're wrong, keep trying. That's the most fundamental way to start working on your intuition. And as parents, the best thing we can do is to help our children to enhance their intuition. Well, Johnny, what do you think about blah, blah, blah? It gives them critical thinking skills. Right. Our educational system now is all about filling out a bubble on a form. Give your kids those critical thinking skills. Okay, Johnny, which broccoli looks better to you in the grocery store, whatever that is. Get your kids involved, have them choose. It gives them power. It gives them the ability to learn to tap into their higher self. And that's critical. That's what's going to change the world. The more we can learn to tap into our higher self and listen and make wise choices. And
don't poo-poo them. Like my daughter used to come to me at nap time and tell me she saw my grandmother at the end of the bed. And the only reason I found that out is because I believed her. And we flipped through photo albums one day and I said, "Oh, do you see the lady at the end of your bed in here anywhere?" And she picked her out.
Exactly. And trust your kids. Kids are really quite psychic when they're little. And when we give them that element of learning how to tap in, and they can start looking ahead. So when this is kind of a hard concept, but when we start trusting our intuition, it's like we can see ahead. We get a 40,000 foot viewpoint of what's going to happen. We're driving down the freeway and we know that car that's 500 feet in front of us is not having a good day, and be careful, go in the other lane, right? Miss or go behind it or get past it. We start to feel the ebb and flow of the energy of the traffic. That's a psychic ability. It's way sexier than seeing dead people.
Another thought just occurred to me too. Sometimes I will be walking down the street, sometimes in the neighborhood, there's an elderly community that I'll walk through, and all of a sudden, all these nasty thoughts just pop in my head, and I go, "Wait a minute, that's not mine. Get out of here." Is that another way that you can get attacked?
Yes. If you have thoughts that are not your own, that's something that's coming in at you. And that it's a big deal, especially for our teenagers, because right now our teenagers are living a lifestyle that no other human has ever lived before. They've got Wi-Fi connectivity. They've got more separation. They've got all kinds of anxieties. No humans have ever lived this lifestyle on the planet before. The 1200s look like the 1300s, looks like the 14, 15, 16, 17. Oh, something changed around the 1900s. Look where we were 150 years ago to where we're at now. Our kids need us. They need us to trust us. Our kids need us to help them shield themselves from these negative energies and entities, because they are getting bombarded. Suicide has never been higher. By the way, suicide's contagious. If a person commits suicide, they do not cross over on their own. They need assistance. Again, we've been programmed to believe that if a person dies by suicide, they deserve to rot in hell. They need to be punished, right? The truth is, and I've crossed over thousands of souls who have committed suicide, more than thousands. When you are that desperate to kill yourself, violence upon yourself is the lowest form of frequency. Violence perpetuated against other people is not as low as violence against myself. And when we die that way, we do not see the light. It's like they die and they're in this bank of fog, like a heavy fog bank, and you can't see your hand in front of your face. They can't see the light to go there. Also, chances are really good they were haunted in life, and what was haunting them in life is now haunting them in death. Oh. They were trying to escape something. They just become a feeding frenzy. So when we can cross over any soul, every soul who dies by suicide, it helps the living and it helps the dead. We're changing that soul's trajectory. We're giving that soul its soul sovereignty back when we cross it over, because it will reincarnate from the fourth dimension, even more broken, even more tortured, and even quite possibly violent towards others. Serial killers are not heaven sent. Again, it's not just the heaven worlds or the higher realms that have access to the reincarnation cycle. It's the lower realms too. So when we can cross over all these souls, we're robbing those dark ones of a food supply. We're giving those souls back their soul sovereignty. I did a past life regression with a client just last week. And in that process, she kept dying by suicide. Ooh. And part of when I do a hypnosis session, there's several elements to it, but the last one is about soul healing. We're working with the higher realms at this point, and they literally collected her soul pieces and put her back together. She's not had epilepsy in 2 weeks.
Wow.
No seizures whatsoever in 2 weeks. And I'm not saying that's going to happen to everybody, but that was a really big deal. It was fascinating how they were bringing in. And for me, when I'm working on that other side, they look like these little wisps, these little soul pieces, soul fragmentations. When we can have the higher realms help us put them back together, or they keep them and guard them for when they cross over, it changes that soul's path for an eternity. Soul sovereignty. They don't come in with broken contracts or false contracts.
So earlier you were going to show us how you were going to help some people cross over. Is that what you were feeling?
You were talking about, thank you, Richard, and some murder victims are like, I can feel their pressure. And for me, I feel a pressure. And I literally just called in a huge entourage of angels. And it's so natural for me at this point that I should have stopped, but I literally called in this entourage of angels to remove and cross over all souls that are within yours and my pathway, and anyone who needs assistance, take them to the appropriate realm of the heaven world right now. And that's exactly what they did. And what I do is, when I bring in the angelic teams, I have them stand in like basically military formation in rows and lines. And I pour salt on them. I pour frankincense oil on them. I pour whatever I can on them, because those are high frequency substances. And when we do that, any imposters reveal themselves, or any thought forms fall away. So now we have a pure team to do the job, and then we cross them over. But yeah, and I don't know if it was Richard necessarily, but there was like a group of murder victims. And I don't know if I got the vibe that they're in the, like, near you, your location. And it just kind of, when we're talking about it, it just kind of created this beacon basically for them. Oh, hey, what's that? Right?
Yeah.
So they're attracted to light. The ghost world is chronically gray, chronically cold. They're hungry. And when they see a bright light in a human, there are people out there who are ghost magnets. They just keep attracting and attracting and attracting them. The issue is the ghosts start feeding on us, because not because they're being vicious or cruel. Sometimes they're being vicious and cruel, but not all the times. And we get tired. We're exhausted. We don't know why. We feel like we have brain fog. We don't know why. Use that crossing over prayer in the book. In the class, there's other techniques we're going over too. to cross them over, because once you do that, you free yourself and you free them in a way they have probably not been freed for many millennia.
Well, living near a 55 plus community would probably have a lot of souls that maybe were taken without warning and were like, uh-oh.
Yeah, and we can fix that. One of the things in the back of that book is that crossing over prayer. I'm telling everybody they can print as many copies as they want of it. Put it in your purse, put it in your car, put it behind your photos in your pictures in your house. One of my biggest challenges in the early days of trying to figure out how to build up my defenses was to make my house not look like it was some kind of weird Chinese brothel thingy, right? So I got really good at disguising. Right. Yeah. So, you can stick them under your bed. You can stick them, be creative. You can put them all over the place. You can stick them in the little pockets in your car. You can use feng shui mirrors. Those are very, very helpful. Put the feng shui mirrors, the backside of picture frames usually have a little tiny gap. Those mirrors pop right in there really well. Just tape it to the backside of the frame. You can put them in your car. I put them all over my car so they're facing out and they're facing front and back, up and down. And I intention them to keep my car and me safe and in good space.
Now, what about pets? Do they need help crossing over sometimes? Do they get too attached to us?
It's a really good question. Pets often do not cross. A lot of times they don't cross over because the owner is grieving so hard. And pets are a service to us. So a lot of times when they leave their body, they don't know that their job is done. And when we can cross over our pets, by the way, those dark entities will also feed off of soul energies of our pets. Happens all the time. Cross them over, hand them over to God, source, creator, whatever your word is. And what ends up happening is they can reincarnate back later. And sometimes they come back as our pets in the same lifetime. Or they greet us when we cross over. That to me is so beautiful and glorious. I basically have a farm that's going to be coming at me and then some, or a zoo or whatever, because we want the best for our pets. And a lot of times our pets are the only creatures, the only beings that ever give us unconditional love. And when we lose them, it is so hard. And a lot of times losing a pet can be a lot more difficult than losing a relative, right? Or a friend or something, because those pets are just, they're there for all of those highs and lows for us.
That's so true. Well, Laura, this has been beautiful. Let people know verbally how they can find you, how they can find your class, and I will also put that information below underneath.
Okay, thank you. It's thekarmicpath.com. And if you're having any of these issues, I really recommend you take this course. If you can't make it live, you get the links, so you always have it with you. I am a firm believer that to give as much information as possible, you're not going to sit there bored twiddling your thumbs. You're going to want to listen to it a couple of times, because the more we can do this, the more we create these spiritual warriors. Then we reclaim the planet and our soul sovereignty. It comes with 3 books. It comes with some aura cleanser. It comes with black tourmaline, resins, on and on and on. It's a really, really consistent, it's a heavy kit that comes with it that gets mailed to you. And that starts on October 21st, by the way. I do run them periodically. And it's thekarmicpath.com. And there's my email too. If you ever have any questions, I'm always answering emails, because this is uncharted territory for a lot of us. And if we can make a difference, even those small ways, everybody working to make a difference, it makes a huge difference. So when we can take control of our lives by dealing with the unseen world, we gain our soul sovereignty back. We have an easier life to live, a better life to live.
We can get to that.
So thank you very much. I appreciate this.
You bet.
Exactly.
You bet. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed speaking with you today. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you, Allison. It was wonderful too. And enjoy your week this week.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.